I always knew my father, Harrison, would find some way to belittle my career, but I never imagined he'd dismiss my role as a senior air traffic controller as just playing house with toy airplanes in front of the entire Thanksgiving dinner table. Sometimes the most devastating family betrayals happen over mashed potatoes and cranberry sauce. What happened 3 weeks later would not only vindicate everything I'd worked for, but leave my father speechless in a way I never thought possible. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Cassandra Rivers, and for the past 8 years, I've worked as a senior air traffic controller at Denver International Airport. It's a job that requires split-second decision-making, incredible focus, and the ability to coordinate hundreds of aircraft movements while keeping thousands of passengers safe every single day. To me, it's not just a career. It's a calling that combines technical precision with life-or-death responsibility. But to my father, Harrison Rivers, a retired construction foreman who spent 40 years building highways and bridges across Colorado, my job has always been nothing more than sitting in a tower talking into a headset. He's never understood why I chose what he calls indoor work over something he considers more substantial, more real, more worthy of the Rivers family name. The tension between us started the moment I graduated from the Federal Aviation Administration's training program at age 24. While my mother, Diane, celebrated my achievement, Harrison made it clear he viewed my career choice as a disappointment. Real work, he'd tell anyone who'd listen, involves building something with your hands, something people can see and touch, not pushing buttons and giving directions to pilots who probably know where they're going anyway. This Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' home in Aurora was supposed to be different. I'd recently received a commendation from the airport director for successfully managing an emergency landing during a severe thunderstorm. A commercial airliner with 280 passengers had lost one engine, and I'd guided them safely to the ground through dangerous weather conditions. The pilot personally thanked me, saying my calm instructions and strategic routing had saved lives. I thought maybe, finally, my father would see the importance of what I do. The dining room was filled with extended family. My Uncle Robert and Aunt Patricia, my cousins Jake and Amanda, and my grandmother Ethel, who at 86 still insisted on bringing her famous apple pie to every gathering. The conversation was flowing pleasantly until my cousin Jake, fresh out of college, asked me about my work. "Cassie has been getting some recognition lately," my mother said proudly, attempting to steer the conversation toward my recent commendation. "She helped save almost 300 people during that big storm last month." I felt the familiar flutter of hope. Maybe this was the moment Harrison would finally acknowledge my professional accomplishments. Instead, he set down his fork with that particular sound of metal against china that always preceded his most dismissive comments. "Oh, that," he said, waving his hand as if shooing away a fly. "She sits in an air-conditioned room telling people where to go. It's like playing house with toy airplanes. Not exactly what I'd call real work." The silence that followed was deafening. My Aunt Patricia looked uncomfortable, shifting in her chair. Jake's eyes darted between his plate and my face, clearly regretting his innocent question. Even grandmother Ethel, usually the family peacemaker, seemed at a loss for words. "Harrison," my mother said quietly, her voice carrying a warning tone I'd heard countless times throughout my childhood. But he wasn't finished. "I mean, come on, Diane. The girl sits at a desk all day talking into a microphone. When I was her age, I was working 14-hour shifts in 100-degree heat, building roads that people actually drive on. Real infrastructure, real contribution to society." He gestured toward me without looking at me. "What does she build? What does she create? She just talks into a microphone." The familiar burn of humiliation spread through my chest, but this time it was accompanied by something else, a cold anger I'd never felt before. 8 years of dismissive comments, 8 years of having my expertise minimized, 8 years of being treated like my career was some kind of elaborate hobby. "I keep people alive, Dad," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Every single day, I make decisions that ensure hundreds of aircraft don't collide midair. I coordinate emergency landings. I manage air traffic flow during severe weather. When pilots are facing life-threatening situations, I'm the voice they rely on to get them safely on the ground. Harrison scoffed, reaching for the gravy boat. Pilots know how to fly planes, Cassie. They don't need someone on the ground telling them how to do their job. That comment revealed everything I needed to know about how little he understood my profession. The ignorance was breathtaking, but what hurt more was the deliberate dismissal of something I'd worked so hard to excel at. I have no idea what I actually do, I said, my voice growing stronger. You've never once asked about the technical aspects of my job, never inquired about the training I've completed, never shown any interest in understanding the complexity of managing airspace? Because there's nothing complex about it, he replied, finally meeting my eyes. It's a government job with good benefits. You talk into a headset and collect a paycheck. It's not like you're out there building something that matters. The rest of the dinner passed in strained politeness, but inside, something had fundamentally shifted. For years, I'd sought his approval, hoping he'd eventually recognize the value of my work. That night, I realized I was never going to get it. Harrison Rivers had decided what constituted real work, and nothing I accomplished would ever measure up to his narrow definition of worth. What I didn't know, as I drove home that night, replaying his cutting words, was that in exactly 21 days, I would receive a phone call that would change everything. A call that would not only validate my expertise in the most dramatic way possible, but would leave my father and our entire family understanding just how wrong he'd been about my toy airplane career. Sometimes vindication comes from the most unexpected places. Sometimes it takes the highest office in the land to make a parent realize their child's true worth. Up next, we're diving into the backstory of how I built my career from the ground up, despite constant family skepticism. You won't want to miss what's coming. Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. To understand how deep this family rift had become, you need to know how I got here in the first place. My journey to becoming a senior air traffic controller wasn't handed to me. It was earned through years of rigorous training, countless sleepless nights studying, and proving myself in one of the most demanding careers in aviation. Growing up in Aurora, Colorado, I was always fascinated by planes. While other kids played with dolls or video games, I spent hours at my bedroom window watching aircraft approach Denver International Airport in the distance. My mother, Diane, would find me with binoculars, tracking flight patterns, and trying to identify different aircraft types. She encouraged my curiosity, buying me books about aviation, and even taking me to air shows when my father was too busy with construction projects. Harrison, however, saw my interest as impractical. Planes are for rich people, Cassie, he'd say whenever he caught me reading about aviation. You need to focus on something realistic, something that pays the bills. His definition of realistic was limited to trades he understood: construction, plumbing, electrical work. Anything that didn't involve getting your hands dirty wasn't real work in his mind. When I graduated high school with a 3.8 GPA and announced my intention to study air traffic management at Metropolitan State University, Harrison's reaction was predictable. "You're wasting money on a fancy education for a job that doesn't exist," he told me over dinner. "Air traffic controllers are going to be replaced by computers in 10 years. Mark my words." That was 15 years ago. Not only do air traffic controllers still exist, but we've become more essential than ever as air travel has exploded and airspace has become increasingly complex. My mother, Diane, a retired elementary school teacher, understood the value of education and specialized training. She'd spent 30 years helping children learn and grow, and she recognized my genuine passion for aviation. While Harrison grumbled about tuition costs, Diane quietly helped me navigate financial aid applications and even took a part-time job at a local bookstore to help cover expenses. "Follow your passion, sweetheart," she'd whisper when Harrison wasn't around. "Don't let anyone convince you that your dreams aren't worth pursuing." The Federal Aviation Administration training program was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. For 18 months, I immersed myself in the intricate world of aviation regulations, radar systems, communication protocols, and emergency procedures. We studied weather patterns, aircraft performance characteristics, and the complex choreography required to safely manage hundreds of aircraft movements every hour. The technical demands were staggering. I had to master multiple radar displays simultaneously, track aircraft at different altitudes and speeds, coordinate with approach controllers, departure controllers, and ground control, all while maintaining constant communication with pilots facing things from routine flights to life-threatening emergencies. The psychological pressure was intense. Every decision I made could affect hundreds of lives. There were nights I'd lie awake, replaying challenging situations, analyzing whether I'd made the right call when guiding a medical emergency to priority landing or managing multiple aircraft during severe weather. My first assignment was at Colorado Springs Airport, a smaller facility where I could develop my skills before potentially moving to a major hub. Harrison's reaction to my job placement was typical. "So you're going to spend your career telling puddle jumper pilots when they can take off? That's what 4 years of college got you?" What he didn't understand was that Colorado Springs was actually a complex airspace environment. We handled military aircraft from nearby Peterson Air Force Base, commercial flights, private jets, and medical helicopters. The coordination required between civilian and military operations was incredibly sophisticated, involving security clearances, classified flight paths, and split-second timing. During my 3 years in Colorado Springs, I handled everything from emergency landings to presidential security operations when Air Force Two made stops at Peterson. I learned to manage the delicate balance between civilian air traffic and military priorities, developing skills that would prove invaluable later in my career. My promotion to Denver International Airport came after I successfully managed a multi-aircraft emergency during a severe winter storm. 3 commercial flights had declared emergencies simultaneously, one with hydraulic failure, another with engine trouble, and a third running dangerously low on fuel after multiple missed approaches. I coordinated their landings, prioritized runway assignments, and worked with emergency responders to ensure all aircraft and passengers reached the ground safely. The airport director personally recommended me for the Denver position, calling my performance exceptional under extraordinary pressure. That promotion meant joining one of the busiest air traffic control facilities in the nation, managing over 1,600 aircraft movements daily across multiple runways. Harrison's response to my career advancement? Well, at least the government job has decent benefits. My colleagues at Denver International became the professional family I'd never had at home. Controllers like Thomas Martinez and Sarah Chen understood the weight of our responsibilities. They'd seen me handle crisis situations with calm precision, coordinate complex aircraft movements during weather delays, and maintain safety standards that exceeded FAA requirements. "Rivers is one of our best," Thomas would tell new trainees. "When the weather hits or emergencies develop, you want her voice in your headset." That kind of professional respect meant everything to me, especially since I'd never received it from my own father. The irony wasn't lost on me that I spent my days earning the trust and respect of pilots responsible for multi-million-dollar aircraft and hundreds of passengers, while my own father continued to view my work as insignificant. Airline captains with decades of experience relied on my guidance during complex approaches. Military pilots trusted my coordination during sensitive operations. Airport officials sought my input on safety protocols and efficiency improvements. But Harrison Rivers remained convinced his daughter was just playing with toy airplanes. My personal relationships suffered under this constant family tension. I dated several men over the years, but the stress of explaining why my father dismissed my accomplished career became exhausting. How do you introduce someone to a family dinner where your own father belittles your professional achievements? My mother tried to bridge the gap, constantly attempting to educate Harrison about the complexity of air traffic control. She'd print articles about aviation safety, share stories about controllers preventing disasters, even suggest he visit my workplace to see what I actually do. His response was always the same: "Diane, stop trying to make her job sound more important than it is." The breaking point had been building for years, but that Thanksgiving dinner crystallized everything. Hearing him dismiss my recent commendation, an achievement that had required split-second decision-making to save 280 lives, as meaningless toy airplane work, was the final straw. What Harrison didn't know was that my reputation in the aviation community extended far beyond Denver International Airport. My expertise had been recognized by the FAA's Western region, and I'd been selected for several high-profile training assignments. My name appeared on lists of controllers qualified to handle VIP flights, military coordination, and emergency operations. In just 3 weeks, all of that expertise was about to converge in a way that would not only vindicate my career, but leave my father speechless. Sometimes professional recognition comes from the most unexpected sources, and sometimes it takes a presidential aircraft to make a parent realize they've been wrong about their child's worth all along. Up next, we're diving into the pattern of family dismissal that had been building for years, and the specific incidents that made this professional validation so much sweeter when it finally arrived. The pattern of dismissal didn't start with that devastating Thanksgiving dinner. It had been building systematically for 8 years, each incident more cutting than the last. What made it particularly painful was how Harrison would undermine my achievements in front of others, as if he needed witnesses to validate his belief that my career was somehow less legitimate than his own. The first major incident happened during my graduation from the FAA training program. I had worked 18 months to earn my certification, studying 12 hours a day, mastering complex radar systems, and passing one of the most rigorous examinations in federal service. Only 60% of candidates make it through the program successfully. When I received my assignment letter to Colorado Springs, I was practically glowing with pride. My mother had organized a small celebration dinner at Romano's, our family's go-to restaurant for special occasions. She had invited my grandparents, Aunt Patricia and Uncle Robert, and even Harrison's construction crew supervisor, Mike O'Sullivan, who Harrison respected tremendously. I thought surely this would be the moment Harrison would acknowledge what I had accomplished. Instead, when Mike congratulated me and asked about air traffic control, Harrison launched into what became his standard dismissal routine. "Oh, Cassie got herself a desk job with the government. Good benefits, steady paycheck, can't complain about that, I suppose." Mike, clearly sensing tension, tried to engage more positively. "Air traffic control sounds pretty challenging, though, all those planes to keep track of." Harrison waved his hand dismissively. "Oh, the computers do most of the work these days. She just has to make sure she doesn't spill coffee on the equipment." The table fell silent. My grandmother Ethel looked mortified. My mother's face flushed with embarrassment and anger. But Harrison seemed pleased with himself, as if he'd made some clever observation. That night, driving home, the sting of his words felt like a physical weight in my chest. I'd spent a year and a half mastering one of the most demanding technical professions in aviation, and my own father had reduced it to "don't spill coffee on the equipment" in front of people whose opinions he valued. The second major incident occurred 2 years later, when I received my first commendation for managing a complex emergency involving a private jet with engine failure. The pilot had lost hydraulic pressure and needed immediate priority landing, but we were dealing with severe crosswinds that made the approach extremely dangerous. I coordinated with emergency responders, cleared the airspace, and guided the pilot through a successful emergency landing that saved 4 lives. The local newspaper ran a small story about the incident, mentioning my role in the successful outcome. My mother proudly shared the article at a family barbecue, reading aloud how the pilot had credited my calm guidance with saving his passengers. Harrison's response was swift and devastating. "Well, sure, anybody can sound calm talking into a microphone," he said, flipping burgers on the grill without looking up. "It's not like she was actually in the plane dealing with the real problem. The pilot did all the hard work." My cousin Jake, who was studying aviation mechanics at the time, tried to defend me. "But Uncle Harrison, air traffic controllers have to make split-second decisions. If Cassie gave the wrong instructions, the plane could have crashed." Harrison's laugh was harsh and dismissive. "Jake, pilots know how to land planes. They don't need someone on the ground holding their hand. That's just government bureaucracy, making simple things complicated so they can justify their paychecks." The casual cruelty of it stunned me. Here was documented evidence that my expertise had directly contributed to saving lives, and Harrison dismissed it as unnecessary bureaucracy. But what hurt more was seeing the confused looks on my cousins' faces, as if Harrison's confident dismissal made them question whether my achievement was actually meaningful. The pattern continued and escalated. When I received my promotion to Denver International Airport, one of the busiest control towers in the nation, Harrison told people I'd transferred to a bigger desk. When I was selected for advanced weather management training, he called it another government seminar. When I earned my rating for handling VIP aircraft, including military and diplomatic flights, he described it as getting permission to talk to fancier planes. The most painful incident occurred during my 28th birthday celebration. My mother had organized a dinner at her house, inviting extended family and a few of my colleagues from Colorado Springs who had become close friends. Sarah Chen and Thomas Martinez came, both experienced controllers who understood the demands of our profession. During dinner, Sarah mentioned how I handled a particularly challenging situation the week before, coordinating multiple aircraft during a severe thunderstorm while training a new controller. "Cassandra is one of the calmest people I've ever worked with under pressure," Sarah told the table. "When everything's going wrong and pilots are stressed, she has this ability to project confidence that keeps everyone focused." I felt a warm flush of pride, hoping maybe Harrison would finally hear from external validation what I'd been trying to tell him for years. Instead, he set down his fork and looked directly at Sarah with that condescending smile I'd come to dread. "Well, that's very nice of you to say, but let's be honest about what we're talking about here. Cassie sits in a climate-controlled room looking at computer screens. She's not out there in 100-degree heat laying asphalt or working on a construction site where one mistake can get someone killed. She talks into a headset. That's not exactly high-pressure work." The silence that followed was excruciating. Sarah and Thomas exchanged bewildered glances. They knew the life-and-death decisions I made daily, the split-second timing required to prevent aircraft collisions, the mental exhaustion that came from maintaining perfect focus during 12-hour shifts. To hear my own father dismiss our profession as low-pressure desk work in front of my professional colleagues was humiliating beyond words. Thomas, bless him, tried to educate Harrison about the realities of air traffic control. "Actually, sir, controllers handle enormous stress levels. We're responsible for aircraft worth hundreds of millions of dollars, carrying hundreds of passengers. The margin for error is essentially zero." Harrison's response revealed the depth of his willful ignorance. "Look, I'm sure you all take your jobs very seriously, but at the end of the day, you're giving directions to people who already know where they're going. It's not like you're building something or fixing something. You're just coordinating." The word coordinating came out of his mouth like something distasteful, as if coordination was somehow lesser than physical labor, as if managing complex systems and preventing disasters was just administrative busy work. That night, after my colleagues left early, clearly uncomfortable with the family tension, I finally confronted Harrison directly. We were alone on the back porch while my mother cleaned up inside. "Dad, I need you to understand something," I said, my voice shaking with suppressed emotion.
When Sarah and Thomas talk about pressure and life and death decisions, they're not exaggerating. Last month, I prevented a mid-air collision between two aircraft carrying 400 people total. My quick thinking and precise instructions kept those planes separated by less than half a mile. That's not coordination. That's crisis management that saved lives.
Harrison was quiet for a long moment, and I thought maybe I'd finally broken through. Then he shook his head slowly. Cassie, I'm sure you feel important when you're doing your job, but let's not get carried away. Planes have been flying safely for decades before you came along. The system works fine without any individual controller being some kind of hero. That response crystallized everything for me. Harrison wasn't just dismissing my specific achievements, he was fundamentally rejecting the idea that my profession had any value at all. In his worldview, anything that didn't produce a tangible, physical product was somehow illegitimate. The dismissals became more frequent and more pointed as my career progressed. When I earned my certification for handling presidential aircraft, a designation that required extensive background checks and specialized training, Harrison told people I'd gotten security clearance to talk to government planes. When I received recognition for training other controllers, he called it teaching other people how to use the radio. Each incident chipped away at my confidence a little more. I started dreading family gatherings, knowing that any mention of my work would trigger Harrison's reflexive dismissal. I stopped sharing professional victories, stopped bringing colleagues to family events, stopped hoping that maybe this time would be different. My mother, bless her heart, tried to intervene repeatedly. She'd pull Harrison aside after particularly cruel comments and explain how his words affected me. She'd share articles about air traffic control, invite him to visit my workplace, even suggest he'd talk to other parents whose children worked in aviation. Nothing worked. Harrison had decided what constituted real work, and nothing would change his mind. The psychological toll was enormous. I began second-guessing myself at work, wondering if maybe Harrison was right and my job really wasn't that important. When pilots thanked me for exceptional service or colleagues praised my performance, part of me heard Harrison's voice dismissing it all as inflated self-importance. But the worst part was how his attitude affected my relationships with other family members. Younger cousins who might have been interested in aviation careers started viewing my work as somehow less legitimate. Extended family members began treating my achievements with polite disinterest, following Harrison's lead in treating my profession as unimportant. The pattern was clear. Harrison had positioned himself as the family authority on what constituted meaningful work, and he used that authority to systematically undermine my professional identity. Each incident built on the previous ones, creating a narrative that my career was essentially make-believe, a government job that provided benefits but contributed nothing of real value to society. What Harrison didn't know was that my reputation in the aviation community was growing stronger every year. My expertise was being recognized at higher and higher levels, and opportunities were coming that would soon put his dismissive attitude to the ultimate test. Sometimes the people who know you least are the ones who think they understand you best, and sometimes it takes an extraordinary situation to reveal just how wrong they've been all along. 3 weeks after that crushing Thanksgiving dinner, I was settling into what I hoped would be a quiet December at Denver International. The holiday travel season always brought its challenges, but I'd learned to find solace in the technical precision of my work. When family relationships felt impossible to navigate, the clear protocols and decisive communication of air traffic control provided a refuge where competence mattered more than family politics. I arrived at work that Tuesday morning with no indication that this would be the day everything changed. The weather was crisp and clear, perfect flying conditions that usually made for smooth operations. I grabbed my usual coffee from the break room, exchanged pleasantries with the night shift controllers finishing the rotation, and settled into my workstation for what I assumed would be a routine day managing the complex stance of aircraft movements across Denver's airspace. My supervisor, Amanda Foster, appeared at my station around 9:30 with an expression I'd rarely seen in my 5 years working under her direction.
Amanda was known throughout the facility for her unflappable demeanor, someone who handled crisis situations with military precision and never seemed rattled by even the most challenging operational demands. But this morning, she looked distinctly nervous. "Cassandra, I need to speak with you privately," she said, gesturing toward her office. "Lisa can cover your sector for a few minutes." As I followed Amanda through the maze of workstations, my mind raced through potential explanations. Had I made an error in yesterday's operations that was just now coming to light? Was there some administrative issue with my recent performance evaluations? Amanda's unusually serious demeanor suggested something significant was developing. Her office was a testament to her 22 years in air traffic control, walls covered with commendations, photographs from various airports where she'd worked, and technical diagrams of airspace configurations. She closed the door behind us and gestured for me to sit in the chair across from her desk. "Cassandra, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me about your capabilities and comfort level." She paused, studying my face intently. "You're rated for VIP aircraft coordination, correct? Including presidential and diplomatic flights?"
Amanda leaned back in her chair, her expression shifting from nervous to something approaching awe. "I just received a call from FAA headquarters in Washington. They're requesting you specifically for an operation that's, well, let's just say it's unprecedented in the history of this facility." My pulse quickened. In air traffic control, unprecedented usually meant either a significant emergency or an operation so sensitive that normal protocols didn't apply. What kind of operation? Before I explain the details, I need to know, how comfortable are you with high-pressure situations involving multiple government agencies, extensive security protocols, and media attention? Amanda's tone suggested this wasn't a hypothetical question. I've handled complex emergencies before. I thought of the engine failure incidents and severe weather operations that had tested my abilities over the years. Media attention would be new, but I'm confident in my technical skills. Amanda nodded slowly, then pulled a folder from her desk drawer. 3 days from now, Air Force One will be making an unscheduled stop at Denver International. Not a normal presidential visit. This is a technical emergency requiring immediate priority landing and specialized ground support. The words hit me like a physical force. Air Force One, the president's aircraft, the most important flight operation in American aviation, requiring the highest levels of security, precision, and expertise. And somehow, I was being specifically requested to handle it. "I don't understand," I managed. "Why me? There are controllers with decades more experience, people who've handled presidential flights before. What makes them think I'm qualified for something this significant?" Amanda opened the folder and withdrew several documents. "Apparently, your reputation extends far beyond Denver International. The request came specifically from the Air Force One pilot, Colonel Rebecca Martinez. She's flown presidential missions for 8 years, and she specifically asked for Cassandra Rivers to handle ground coordination for their emergency landing." I stared at Amanda in disbelief. She asked for me by name? I've never worked with Air Force One operations. How does she even know who I am? "That's what makes this so remarkable," Amanda said, consulting one of the documents. According to the briefing materials, Colonel Martinez was previously stationed at Peterson Air Force Base. During her time there, she flew numerous missions that required coordination with Colorado Springs Air Traffic Control. Apparently, your work during those operations made such an impression that when she needed someone she could trust for this emergency situation, your name was the first one that came to mind. The pieces began clicking together in my mind. During my 3 years at Colorado Springs, I had indeed coordinated numerous military flights with Peterson Air Force Base. Some were routine training missions, others involved classified operations that I couldn't discuss even with family. I remembered several particularly challenging coordinations involving bad weather and complex airspace requirements, but I'd never learned the names of specific pilots involved. "What's the nature of the emergency?" I asked, my professional instincts taking over despite my personal shock at being specifically requested.
Hydraulic system malfunction detected during a routine flight from Washington to California. They need priority landing with full emergency response standing by. The approach will be complicated by the aircraft's size and weight, and they're requesting the most experienced controller available for ground coordination. The technical challenges began crystallizing in my mind. Air Force One was essentially a modified Boeing 747, requiring longer runways and specialized approach procedures. A hydraulic malfunction would affect the aircraft's ability to control surfaces during landing, making precise guidance from ground control absolutely critical. This wasn't just a prestigious assignment. It was a genuine emergency, requiring the highest level of skill and experience. Colonel Martinez specifically mentioned your performance during a complex multi-aircraft coordination in severe weather conditions. Apparently, you managed her flight along with 2 other military aircraft and a medical emergency, all during a winter storm with visibility near minimums. She told headquarters that your calm guidance and strategic thinking were instrumental in getting all aircraft safely on the ground. I remembered that day vividly, one of the most challenging coordinations of my early career. 3 aircraft with different emergency priorities, weather conditions that changed by the minute, and coordination requirements between civilian emergency responders and military security protocols. It had been exhausting and stressful, but ultimately successful. I never imagined that one of those pilots would remember my performance years later when facing her own emergency. "There's something else," Amanda said, her tone shifting to something approaching wonder. "The White House Communications Agency has requested a complete briefing on your background and experience. They want to ensure the president's safety is in the most capable hands possible. Cassandra, this assignment could define your entire career in air traffic control." The magnitude of what was happening began to sink in. In 3 days, I would be responsible for guiding the president's aircraft safely to the ground during an emergency situation. The technical demands would be enormous, the security requirements unprecedented, and the media attention would be national in scope. Success would validate everything I'd worked toward in my career. Failure was unthinkable. But more than the professional implications, I couldn't help thinking about Harrison and his dismissive comments about my toy airplane career. The pilot of Air Force One, the most important aircraft in American aviation, had specifically requested me by name based on my demonstrated expertise. The president's safety would depend on skills Harrison considered meaningless desk work. "I need to ask," Amanda said gently, "are you prepared for this? Not just technically, but personally. This operation will generate significant media coverage. Your name will be in newspapers and news broadcasts. You'll be recognized as the controller who guided Air Force One during a presidential emergency." I thought about that devastating Thanksgiving dinner, Harrison's cruel dismissal of my commendation, his insistence that pilots didn't need ground controllers telling them how to do their jobs. In 3 days, the most experienced pilot in presidential aviation would be depending on my guidance to safely land the most important aircraft in the world. "Yes," I said, my voice steady with newfound confidence. "I'm ready." Amanda smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her all morning. "Good, because starting tomorrow, you'll be working with Secret Service agents, White House communications specialists, and FAA headquarters coordinators to prepare for this operation. This is the kind of assignment that comes once in a lifetime, Cassandra. Don't underestimate how extraordinary this opportunity is." As I walked back to my workstation, my mind was racing with technical considerations, security protocols, and logistical requirements. But underneath the professional excitement was something else entirely, a deep satisfaction that my expertise was being recognized at the highest levels of American aviation. Harrison had spent 8 years dismissing my career as unimportant government busywork. In 3 days, that same career would be entrusted with safely landing the President of the United States during an aircraft emergency. Sometimes vindication comes in ways you never could have imagined. The day of the Air Force One operation arrived with crystalline December weather that seemed almost too perfect for such a momentous occasion.
I'd arrived at Denver International at 4:30 a.m., 3 hours before my normal shift, to begin the extensive pre-flight coordination that an emergency presidential landing required. The facility buzzed with an energy I'd never experienced. Secret Service agents coordinated with airport security, White House communications specialists tested encrypted radio channels, and FAA supervisors from Washington monitored every aspect of the operation. By 6 a.m., I was positioned at the primary approach control station, surrounded by backup controllers, supervisors, and federal agents who would observe every aspect of the coordination. Multiple radar displays showed the approach corridors that had been cleared for Air Force One's priority landing. Emergency vehicles were positioned along the designated runway, and all civilian air traffic had been rerouted to accommodate the presidential aircraft's needs. Colonel Rebecca Martinez's voice came through my headset at exactly 6:47 a.m., calm and professional, despite the hydraulic emergency that had prompted this unscheduled landing. Denver approach, Air Force One requesting priority approach, aircraft experiencing partial hydraulic system failure, requesting emergency equipment standing by. Air Force One, Denver approach, we have you on radar, priority approach approved, runway 24 right cleared for emergency landing, emergency equipment is in position and standing by. Colonel, we're ready to bring you home safely. What followed was 43 minutes of the most intense air traffic coordination of my career. The hydraulic malfunction meant Colonel Martinez had limited control over the aircraft's flaps and landing gear, requiring careful speed and altitude management during the approach. I guided Air Force One through a series of increasingly precise vectors, coordinating with approach radar, tower controllers, and ground emergency teams, while maintaining constant communication with the pilot about her aircraft's capabilities and limitations. The technical complexity was staggering. Air Force One weighs over 400,000 pounds fully loaded, requiring specific approach speeds and runway distances that pushed the limits of even Denver International's longest runway. With compromised hydraulics, Colonel Martinez needed precise guidance to maintain the optimal glide path while managing reduced control authority. Every instruction I gave had to account for the aircraft's limited maneuverability and the critical timing required for a successful emergency landing. Air Force One, reduce speed to 160 knots, descend and maintain 4,000 feet, turn left heading 240 for final approach. I transmitted, watching the aircraft's progress on multiple radar screens while coordinating with emergency responders positioned along the runway. Air Force One, Denver approach, reducing to 160, descending to 4,000, left turn 240, aircraft handling is sluggish but manageable. Colonel Martinez responded, her voice maintaining the professional calm that marked truly exceptional pilots. Throughout the approach, I was acutely aware of the observers surrounding my workstation. Secret Service agents monitored the communications, FAA supervisors evaluated every decision I made, and White House staff coordinated with Washington about the president's safety. The weight of responsibility was unlike anything I'd experienced in my career. Not just managing an aircraft emergency, but ensuring the safety of the most important flight in American aviation. As Air Force One lined up for final approach, the tension in the control room was palpable. This was the critical moment where all the coordination and preparation would be tested. The aircraft appeared on our visual approach monitoring system, a massive blue and white Boeing 747 descending toward runway 24 right with emergency vehicles positioned along both sides of the landing surface. Air Force One, you are cleared to land runway 24 right, wind calm, emergency equipment standing by, I transmitted, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether this operation would be remembered as a textbook emergency coordination or something far worse. Denver approach, Air Force One, cleared to land 24 right. Thank you for your exceptional guidance throughout this approach. Colonel Martinez responded, and I could hear genuine gratitude in her voice, despite the professional composure required during emergency operations. The landing itself was masterful. Colonel Martinez brought the massive aircraft down with precision that showcased decades of experience and training. Air Force One touched down smoothly despite the hydraulic limitations, rolled out safely along the runway centerline, and came to a controlled stop with emergency vehicles immediately moving into escort positions.
Denver approach, Air Force One, safely on the ground, excellent work bringing us home, Colonel Martinez transmitted. and the control room erupted in quiet applause from the federal agents and supervisors who had witnessed the entire coordination. But the most extraordinary moment came 30 minutes later as I was completing the post-incident paperwork and debriefing with FAA supervisors. Amanda Foster approached my workstation with an expression of barely contained excitement. "Cassandra, Colonel Martinez has requested to speak with you personally," she said, gesturing toward her office where a secure phone line had been established. "The White House Communications Agency has arranged a direct call." Walking toward Amanda's office, I felt a surreal disconnection from reality. 48 hours ago, I'd been enduring my father's dismissive comments about my toy airplane career. Now, the pilot of Air Force One was requesting personal communication to discuss the emergency coordination I'd just completed. Colonel Martinez's voice came through the secure line with warmth that transcended the professional distance required during the emergency operation. "Controller Rivers, I wanted to personally thank you for exceptional performance during what could have been a very challenging situation. Your calm guidance and precise vectoring made a significant difference in bringing this aircraft safely to the ground." "Thank you, Colonel. It was an honor to coordinate your approach," I replied, still processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. "There's something else I wanted to tell you," Colonel Martinez continued. "Your reputation in the aviation community extends far beyond what you might realize. During my time at Peterson, I flew numerous missions that required coordination with Colorado Springs Approach Control. Your work during complex weather operations and multi-aircraft emergencies was consistently exceptional. When we faced this hydraulic emergency and needed the most capable controller available, your name was the first one I mentioned to FAA headquarters." The validation was overwhelming. Here was one of the most experienced pilots in American aviation, someone responsible for presidential safety during flight operations, specifically praising my technical skills and professional competence. The contrast with Harrison's dismissive attitude couldn't have been more stark. "I understand this coordination will receive significant media attention," Colonel Martinez added. "The President specifically asked me to convey his personal gratitude for your role in ensuring his safe arrival. Your expertise made a difference at the highest levels of government, Controller Rivers." After the call ended, I sat in Amanda's office trying to process everything that had happened. In the span of a few hours, I'd successfully coordinated the most important aircraft emergency of my career, received personal recognition from Air Force One's pilot, and earned gratitude from the President of the United States for my professional competence. The media attention began almost immediately. By afternoon, news crews had arrived at Denver International Airport, seeking interviews about the successful emergency landing. My name appeared in news reports as the air traffic controller who had guided Air Force One safely to the ground during a hydraulic emergency. The technical precision required for the coordination was highlighted in aviation publications, and my role became part of the official record of presidential aircraft operations. But more than the professional recognition or media coverage, what struck me most was the complete vindication of everything I'd worked for in my career. Harrison had spent 8 years dismissing my expertise as meaningless desk work, insisting that pilots didn't need ground controllers telling them how to do their jobs. Yet when the most important pilot in American aviation faced a genuine emergency, she specifically requested my guidance based on my demonstrated competence during previous complex operations. As I drove home that evening, mentally preparing to share this extraordinary day with my family, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. 8 years of rigorous training, countless hours managing complex aircraft emergencies, professional recognition from colleagues and supervisors, and now validation at the highest levels of American aviation. Harrison's words from that devastating Thanksgiving dinner echoed in my mind. "She sits in an air-conditioned room telling people where to go. It's like playing house with toy airplanes." Today, those same skills had been entrusted with safely landing the President of the United States during an aircraft emergency. Sometimes vindication comes in ways you never could have imagined. Sometimes it takes an extraordinary situation to reveal the true value of expertise that others have consistently dismissed. And sometimes the most important validation comes not from family acceptance, but from professional recognition at levels you never dreamed possible. The news broke before I even made it home from work. By 7 p.m., my successful coordination of Air Force One's emergency landing was the lead story on every major news network. The drive home took twice as long as usual because I kept hearing my name on radio broadcasts, each report describing how Denver Air Traffic Controller Cassandra Rivers guided the president's aircraft safely to the ground during a hydraulic emergency. My phone started ringing at 6:45 p.m. and hadn't stopped since. CNN wanted an interview. The local ABC affiliate was requesting an on-camera statement. Aviation Week magazine was asking for detailed technical commentary. The FAA's Public Affairs Office had called 3 times to coordinate media responses and schedule official briefings. My quiet life as an anonymous air traffic controller had been shattered in the span of a few hours. But the call from my mother at 7:23 p.m. was truly the beginning of everything changing. Diane's voice was breathless with excitement and what sounded suspiciously like tears of pride.
"Cassie, honey, I'm watching you on the news right now," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. "They're calling you a hero. They're showing pictures of Air Force One landing and saying you were the one who brought them down safely. The president's airplane, Cassie. The president!" I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car, engines still running, trying to process the surreal nature of this conversation. 12 hours ago, I'd been an air traffic controller known only to my colleagues and immediate family. Now my professional competence was being discussed on national television as a matter of presidential safety. "Mom, it was just doing my job," I said, though even as the words left my mouth, I knew they weren't entirely true. This hadn't been routine coordination. It had been the pinnacle of everything I'd trained for during my entire career. "Just your job?" Diane's voice rose with indignation that seemed directed at someone other than me. "Cassandra Rivers, you saved the president's life today. That pilot specifically requested you by name. They're interviewing aviation experts on TV who are saying this was one of the most complex emergency coordinations they've ever seen." The weight of what had happened was starting to sink in. This wasn't just professional recognition within the aviation community. This was national validation of my expertise at the highest possible level. Every dismissive comment Harrison had made over the years suddenly seemed not just wrong, but laughably ignorant. "Where's Dad?" I asked, curious about Harrison's reaction to news coverage that was impossible to dismiss or minimize. There was a long pause before my mother responded, and when she did, her voice carried a tone I'd never heard before, a mixture of satisfaction and something that might have been vindication. "She's in his workshop," she said carefully. "He's been out there since the news started, hasn't said a word to anyone. Jake called an hour ago after seeing you on CNN, and your father just walked outside without responding." The image of Harrison retreating to his workshop, his usual refuge when confronted with situations he couldn't control or dismiss, was deeply satisfying in a way that surprised me. For 8 years, Harrison had confidently dismissed my career with unwavering certainty. Now, faced with undeniable evidence of my professional competence at the highest levels, he had no response except retreat. My phone buzzed with an incoming call from my cousin Jake, who worked as an aviation mechanic at a regional airport. I've always appreciated his genuine interest in my work, partly because he understood the technical complexity of aviation operations in ways most family members didn't. "Cassie, holy shit, you're all over the news!" Jake's excitement was infectious. "I'm at work right now, and every pilot and mechanic here is talking about the Air Force One landing. They're saying the coordination was textbook perfect under extremely challenging conditions." "It was definitely intense," I admitted, finally turning off my car and walking toward my front door. The hydraulic failure made everything more complicated than a normal approach. "Complicated?" Jake laughed.
Cassie, I just watched an interview with a retired Air Force colonel who said what you did today was exceptional airmanship from ground control. He said most controllers would have been overwhelmed by the security requirements alone, never mind the technical challenges of coordinating an emergency landing for a 747 with hydraulic problems. The validation from aviation professionals who understood the technical demands was almost more meaningful than the media attention. These were people who knew exactly what was required to successfully coordinate complex aircraft emergencies, and their assessment carried weight that transcended family politics. "Has anyone talked to Uncle Harrison?" Jake asked, his tone shifting to something more cautious. "Because honestly, after all the shit he's given you about your job being unimportant, this has got to be eating him alive." The observation was blunt but accurate. Harrison had built his identity around being the family authority on what constituted meaningful work. His dismissive attitude toward my career had been so consistent and confident that backing down now would require acknowledging 8 years of willful ignorance about my professional competence. "Mom says he's hiding in his workshop. I imagine this is challenging for him to process." My phone immediately buzzed with a text message from my Aunt Patricia. "Watching you on Channel 7 right now. So proud of you. Harrison owes you the biggest apology in family history." That sentiment was echoed throughout the evening as extended family members, childhood friends, and former colleagues reached out with congratulations and amazement. Social media notifications were coming faster than I could process them. My LinkedIn profile had dozens of new connection requests from aviation professionals I'd never met. The local newspaper wanted to schedule an interview about growing up in Aurora and pursuing a career in air traffic control. But the most significant call came at 9:15 p.m. from Amanda Foster, who was handling media coordination with FAA headquarters and had updates about the continuing national coverage. "Cassandra, I need to prepare you for what's coming," Amanda said, her voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who'd spent the day managing unprecedented media attention. "This story has legs beyond what any of us expected. The White House press office is highlighting your role in their official statement about the incident. The FAA administrator is planning to personally recognize your performance. And there's talk of congressional acknowledgement for exceptional service to presidential safety."
Congressional acknowledgement. My head was spinning with the magnitude of recognition being discussed. This was validation beyond anything I'd ever imagined when I chose air traffic control as my career path. "There's something else," Amanda continued. "Colonel Martinez has requested permission to personally thank you at a public ceremony. The Air Force wants to highlight the coordination between military and civilian aviation professionals. This could be a significant career opportunity for you, Cassandra. National recognition like this opens doors that normally take decades to access." After ending the call, I sat in my living room surrounded by the quiet normalcy of my modest home, trying to process the extraordinary transformation my life had undergone in a single day. This morning, I'd been an accomplished but relatively anonymous air traffic controller. Tonight, my professional competence was being discussed in White House press briefings and congressional offices. The vindication was complete and overwhelming. Every dismissive comment Harrison had made over the years about my job being unimportant desk work, about pilots not needing ground controllers, about my career contributing nothing meaningful to society, had been thoroughly refuted by the most important aviation operation in American government. My phone rang again at 10:30 p.m. The caller ID showed my parents' home number, but when I answered, it was my mother's voice, calling from the kitchen phone while Harrison remained exiled to his workshop. "Honey, there's something you need to know," Diane said, her voice carrying a complexity of emotions I couldn't immediately interpret. "Channel 9 just ran a feature story about your background. They interviewed your old supervisor from Colorado Springs, some of your colleagues from Denver International, even your elementary school principal, who remembered you being fascinated by airplanes." The comprehensiveness of the media coverage was staggering. In less than 12 hours, journalists had constructed a complete narrative of my journey from airplane-obsessed child to the air traffic controller trusted with presidential aircraft during emergencies. They also interviewed family members, my mother continued carefully. "Jake gave a wonderful statement about your dedication to aviation.
Aunt Patricia talked about how proud the family is of your achievements. What about Dad? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. The reporter tried to reach him for comment, Diane said quietly. He declined to participate. The image of Harrison declining to comment on national news coverage of his daughter's exceptional professional achievement was perhaps more telling than any statement he could have made. After 8 years of confidently dismissing my career, he apparently had nothing to say when that same career was recognized at the highest levels of American government. As I finally prepared for bed that night, I reflected on the extraordinary reversal that had occurred. 24 hours ago, Harrison's opinion of my career was a source of ongoing pain and family tension. Tonight, that opinion had been rendered completely irrelevant by professional validation that transcended anything he could understand or dismiss. Sometimes, vindication comes not through convincing skeptics, but through achieving recognition so profound that skepticism becomes impossible to maintain. Sometimes the best response to dismissive family members isn't argument, but excellence that speaks for itself. The revelation came 3 days after the Air Force One incident, delivered through an unexpected phone call that would shatter everything I thought I understood about my father's dismissive attitude toward my career. I was at work, managing routine afternoon traffic, when Amanda Foster approached my station with that same serious expression she'd worn before delivering news about the presidential aircraft coordination. "Cassandra, there's someone on the phone who needs to speak with you," she said, gesturing to her office. It's complicated. You should take this call privately." The voice on the other end of the line was unfamiliar but authoritative, introducing himself as Robert Kellerman from the FAA's Office of Professional Standards. My initial thought was that this might be related to additional recognition for the Air Force One coordination, but his tone suggested something far more serious. "Ms. Rivers, I'm calling regarding some information that came to light during our routine background verification following your involvement in the presidential aircraft operation," he began carefully. "During our review process, we discovered some inconsistencies that require clarification." My pulse quickened. Background verification was standard procedure for any controller involved in high-security operations. But inconsistencies suggested problems I couldn't imagine. My record was spotless, no violations, no disciplinary actions, consistent high-performance ratings throughout my career. "What kind of inconsistencies?" I asked, genuinely puzzled. He continued, "It concerns your initial application for air traffic control training 8 years ago, specifically a letter of recommendation that was submitted as part of your candidacy package. The letter was allegedly written by Harrison Rivers, described as a supervisor with the Colorado Department of Transportation, praising your work ethic and suitability for federal aviation service."
The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, as Robert explained that during routine verification following high-profile cases, the FAA sometimes contacted original references to confirm their recommendations. When they called the Colorado Department of Transportation to verify Harrison's employment and letter, they discovered something that made no sense. "Ms. Rivers, your father has never been employed by the Colorado Department of Transportation," Robert said carefully. "He's been a private construction foreman for the past 40 years, working for various private contractors. He has no connection to any state transportation agency and no authority to write letters on their letterhead." The implications were staggering. Someone had forged a government document using Harrison's name to support my FAA application. But if Harrison hadn't written the letter and had no connection to the state transportation department, who had created this elaborate deception? "We need to determine whether you were aware of any irregularities in your application materials," Robert continued. "This could potentially affect your security clearance and employment status, depending on what our investigation reveals." After assuring him of my complete ignorance about any forged documents, I ended the call with instructions to report to FAA headquarters in Denver the following morning for a formal interview. But first, I needed answers from the only person who might know what had actually happened during my application process 8 years ago. The drive to my parents' house that evening felt surreal. I was still processing the national recognition from the Air Force One coordination while simultaneously facing the possibility that my entire career might be built on fraudulent documentation.
The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. Just as I'd achieved the ultimate professional vindication, my career foundation was being questioned. My mother answered the door with the same proud smile she'd worn since the news coverage began, but her expression shifted immediately when she saw my face. "Cassie, honey, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Mom, I need to talk to you and Dad about something serious. Something about my FAA application from 8 years ago." Diane's face went pale. "What about your application?" "Someone forged a letter of recommendation using Dad's name and fake state government letterhead. The FAA discovered it during background verification after the Air Force One incident." The color drained completely from my mother's face, and for a moment I thought she might collapse. She gripped the doorframe for support, her eyes darting toward Harrison, the workshop where light still glowed from the windows. "Oh, God. Oh, Cassie, I never thought. It's been so long I didn't think anyone would ever check." The admission hit me like a thunderbolt. My mother, my supportive, encouraging mother who had always believed in my dreams, had been involved in forging federal documents to support my career. "Mom, what did you do?" Diane stepped aside to let me into the house, her hands shaking as she closed the door behind us. "Sit down, honey. This is going to be difficult to explain." What followed was the most shocking conversation of my life. 8 years ago, when I was struggling to complete my FAA application, my mother had been devastated by Harrison's refusal to provide any support for my career aspirations. She watched me work multiple part-time jobs to pay for aviation courses, while he actively discouraged my impractical dreams. You needed letters of recommendation from supervisors or employers. You'd worked those summer jobs with construction crews when you were in college, but when you asked your father to write something about your work ethic, he refused. He said he wouldn't be part of what he called encouraging unrealistic expectations. The memory was coming back to me now. I had indeed worked several summers during college with construction crews, mostly doing paperwork and site organization for small contractors Harrison knew. I'd asked him to write a letter about my reliability and attention to detail, but he'd dismissed the request as asking him to lie about skills I didn't possess. "So I did what any mother would do," Diane continued, tears starting to flow. "I researched what kind of letter you needed, found examples online, and wrote one myself. I used the Colorado Department of Transportation letterhead because I thought it would carry more weight than a private contractor recommendation." "But how did you get official letterhead? How did you know what to write?" My mother's confession became even more stunning. Diane had spent 30 years as an elementary school teacher, which had given her access to various government and educational resources through professional networks. She'd obtained the letterhead through a colleague who worked with state education departments and had crafted the letter based on recommendation templates she'd found through education research databases. "I forged your father's signature because I knew his name would be on your application as family. I thought using a family member with construction experience would seem natural. I never imagined the FAA would verify letters of recommendation years later." The technical sophistication of my mother's deception was remarkable. She had created a convincing government document, researched appropriate language and formatting, and successfully submitted it to federal authorities as part of my application package, all while maintaining complete secrecy for 8 years. "Does Dad know about this?" I asked, though part of me already suspected the answer. "Harrison has no idea," Diane said firmly. "He would have been furious if he'd known I was supporting your application in any way. He made it clear he wanted no part of what he considered an irresponsible career choice."
The implications were devastating. My mother had committed federal fraud to support my career aspirations, while my father remained completely ignorant of her actions. For 8 years, I'd resented Harrison's lack of support, never knowing that the very support I thought I'd lacked had actually been provided through illegal means by someone else entirely. "Mom, this could destroy my career," I said, the weight of the situation finally sinking in. "Forging federal documents is a serious crime. The FAA could revoke my certification, press charges, end everything I've worked for."
Diane's tears came harder now. I know, honey. I've been terrified about this ever since you started getting national attention. I kept hoping no one would ever look that closely at old application materials. But when you appeared on every news channel, I knew it was only a matter of time. The revelation reframed everything I thought I understood about my family dynamics. Harrison's dismissive attitude toward my career hadn't been contradicted by secret support, it had been genuine throughout. Meanwhile, my mother's encouragement had extended to criminal activity that she'd hidden from both her husband and her daughter. There's something else you need to understand, Diane continued, her voice growing stronger despite her tears. I don't regret what I did. You had the talent, the dedication, and the passion for this career. The only thing standing between you and success was your father's stubborn refusal to acknowledge your potential. I wasn't going to let his narrow-mindedness destroy your dreams. The twisted logic was both touching and terrifying. My mother had committed a federal crime out of love and belief in my abilities while maintaining the secret for 8 years as I built a successful career that had culminated in national recognition for exceptional performance. But now that secret threatened to destroy everything. The FAA investigation would undoubtedly uncover the truth about the forged letter. My security clearance would be revoked, my career would end in scandal, just as it had reached its highest point of recognition. The irony was crushing. Achieving the ultimate professional vindication had triggered the investigation that would expose the fraudulent foundation of my entire career. As I drove home that night, my mind raced with impossible choices. I could confess my mother's deception to the FAA, potentially implicating her in federal fraud charges while ending my own career. I could remain silent and hope the investigation wouldn't uncover the truth, risking even worse consequences if the deception was discovered later. Or I could try to find some middle ground that might preserve both my career and my mother's freedom. What I couldn't escape was the devastating realization that my greatest professional triumph, the Air Force One coordination that had finally vindicated my career against Harrison's dismissive attitude, had also triggered the investigation that threatened to expose the criminal deception that had made my career possible in the first place. Sometimes the moment of greatest vindication becomes the catalyst for the most devastating revelations. Sometimes achieving everything you've worked for creates the circumstances that threaten to take it all away. The meeting with FAA investigators the next morning was scheduled at 9 a.m. at their downtown Denver offices. I arrived 30 minutes early, my stomach churning with anxiety and the weight of the decision I'd made during a sleepless night. After hours of agonizing deliberation, I'd concluded that honesty was the only path forward, regardless of the consequences for my career or my mother's legal situation. Robert Kellerman met me in a sterile conference room accompanied by 2 other investigators and a legal representative from the FAA's Office of General Counsel. The formal atmosphere made clear that this wasn't a routine administrative review. This was a serious investigation into potential federal fraud that could result in criminal charges. Miss Rivers, thank you for coming in, Robert began, arranging documents on the table between us. Before we begin, I want to inform you that you have the right to legal representation during this interview. Anything you say could potentially be used in administrative or criminal proceedings. The gravity of the situation hit me fully. I was potentially facing federal fraud charges related to my career application, charges that could result in prison time, permanent loss of my aviation certification, and destruction of everything I'd worked to achieve. But I'd made my decision during those dark hours before dawn. I understand my rights, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I want to tell you the complete truth about what happened with my application 8 years ago. What followed was the most difficult conversation of my professional life. I explained everything. My father's opposition to my career choice, his refusal to write recommendation letters, my mother's deception in forging the government document, and my complete ignorance of the fraud until their investigation revealed it. The investigators listened without interruption, occasionally making notes but maintaining professional neutrality throughout my confession. To be clear, Robert said when I finished, you're stating that you had no knowledge of the fraudulent letter and discovered your mother's actions only yesterday when we contacted you about verification issues.
The lead counsel, a woman named Janet Morrison, leaned forward with obvious concern. Ms. Rivers, you understand that this confession could result in serious consequences for both you and your mother? Administrative action against your certification, potential criminal charges for both parties, and permanent disqualification from Federal Aviation Service? I nodded, fighting back tears. I understand, but I can't build my career on a foundation of lies, especially now that the truth has come out. My mother committed fraud to help me, but I won't compound that mistake by covering it up or lying to federal investigators. The interview continued for 2 hours as they documented every detail of my application process, my relationship with my parents, and my discovery of the deception. Throughout, I maintained complete honesty about my mother's actions while emphasizing my own ignorance of the fraud until their investigation began. When the formal interview concluded, Robert surprised me with an unexpected statement. Ms. Rivers, your cooperation and honesty during this investigation will be noted in our report. However, we need to conduct additional interviews with your mother and potentially your father before reaching any conclusions about appropriate action. Leaving the FAA offices, I felt simultaneously relieved and terrified. The truth was finally out, but the consequences remained uncertain. My career hung in the balance, my mother faced potential criminal charges, and my family was about to be torn apart by revelations that would devastate everyone involved. The confrontation with Harrison came that evening, arranged through a carefully orchestrated family meeting that Diane had reluctantly agreed to host. She'd spent the day wrestling with the reality that her 8-year-old secret was about to explode across our family dynamics in the most destructive way possible. Harrison arrived at the house still glowing with pride from the continuing media coverage of my Air Force One coordination. Local newspapers had run follow-up stories about my career journey, and aviation publications were highlighting the technical excellence of the emergency landing coordination. For the first time in our relationship, he seemed genuinely proud of my professional achievements. Cassie, I saw the article in today's Post about your training background, he said as we gathered in the living room. I had no idea the FAA program was so competitive. They're saying only the top candidates get selected for the kind of high-security operations you're handling. The irony was devastating. Just as Harrison was beginning to understand and appreciate my career achievements, I was about to reveal that those achievements were built on fraudulent foundations that his wife had created without his knowledge. Dad, we need to talk about something serious. I began, my voice heavy with the weight of what I was about to reveal. Something about my FAA application from 8 years ago. That's going to be very difficult for you to hear. Diane sat rigidly on the edge of the sofa, her face pale and her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She'd agreed to this confrontation, but clearly dreaded the conversation that was about to unfold. Harrison's expression shifted from pride to concern. What kind of problem? I thought your career was going perfectly. You're getting national recognition, presidential commendations, everything you've worked for. The FAA discovered something during routine background verification after the Air Force One incident. They found a letter of recommendation in my application file that was allegedly written by you using Colorado Department of Transportation letterhead supporting my candidacy for air traffic control training. Harrison looked confused rather than alarmed. A letter from me? Cassie, I never wrote any letter for your application. I told you 8 years ago I wouldn't support what I thought was an impractical career choice. The moment of truth had arrived. I looked at my mother, whose tears were already beginning to flow, then back at Harrison, who was starting to understand that something significant and disturbing was about to be revealed. Dad, the letter exists. It's in my official file, written on government letterhead and signed with your name.
The FAA investigators confirmed that you've never worked for the State Transportation Department and had no authority to write such a letter. Harrison's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, realization, and then dawning horror as the implications became clear. His gaze shifted to Diane, who was now crying openly, and understanding filled his eyes. "Diane," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight I'd never heard before, "what did you do?" What followed was the most emotionally devastating family conversation of our lives. Diane confessed everything. Her research into recommendation requirements, her acquisition of official letterhead through education contacts, her careful forgery of Harrison's signature, and her 8 years of maintaining the secret while watching me build a successful career. Harrison's reaction was unlike anything I'd ever witnessed from him. The man who had confidently dismissed my career achievements for 8 years was suddenly confronted with evidence that his wife had committed federal fraud to support the very career he had opposed. His worldview was being challenged from multiple directions simultaneously. "You forged federal documents using my name," he said slowly, as if trying to process the magnitude of what he was learning. "You committed a crime to support Cassie's application for a job I told you I didn't want her to have."
"I did what any mother would do to protect her daughter's dreams," Diane replied through her tears. "I watched you crush her spirit with your constant dismissal of her passion. I saw her talent and dedication, and I wasn't going to let your stubbornness destroy her future." The accusation hung in the air between them, highlighting 8 years of fundamental disagreement about my career that had never been directly addressed. Harrison had been openly dismissive, while Diane had been secretly supportive, to the point of criminal activity. "But now you've destroyed her future anyway," Harrison said, his voice growing stronger. "When this comes out, Cassie loses everything. Her career, her reputation, her security clearance. You've made her an unwitting accomplice to federal fraud." The argument that followed revealed layers of family dysfunction that had been building for years. Harrison's rigid views about appropriate careers, Diane's willingness to go to illegal lengths to support my dreams, and my own position as the unwitting beneficiary of criminal activity designed to help me succeed despite family opposition. But something unexpected happened during that devastating confrontation. As Harrison processed the full scope of what Diane had done and why she'd felt compelled to do it, his anger began shifting towards something that looked remarkably like self-reflection. "I need to understand something," he said after nearly an hour of heated discussion. "You felt so strongly that I was wrong about Cassie's career that you were willing to commit a federal crime to prove it?" Diane looked directly at him, her tears finally subsiding. "Harrison, you spent 8 years telling our daughter that her work was meaningless, that pilots didn't need air traffic controllers, that her career contributed nothing to society. 3 days ago, the President of the United States thanked her personally for exceptional performance that saved lives. Which one of us was wrong about her potential?" The question forced Harrison to confront the fundamental contradiction between his dismissive attitude and the undeniable evidence of my professional competence at the highest levels. For 8 years, he'd been confidently wrong about my career, while Diane had been criminally supportive, but ultimately vindicated in her belief in my abilities. "I was wrong about your work, Cassie," Harrison said, finally, the words coming with obvious difficulty. "I was wrong about air traffic control, wrong about your skills, wrong about the importance of what you do. But that doesn't justify what your mother did. 2 wrongs don't make a right." The admission was 8 years overdue, but it came at the worst possible moment. Just as Harrison was finally acknowledging my professional worth, the criminal foundation of my career was threatening to destroy everything we'd both learned about the value of my work. As the evening drew to a close, our family faced an impossible situation. I'd confessed to federal investigators, potentially implicating my mother in serious criminal charges. Harrison had finally acknowledged his years of wrongful dismissal of my career,
And Diane had revealed the extent of her belief in my potential, while simultaneously threatening to destroy the career she'd fought to make possible. The next few weeks would determine whether honesty and family healing could somehow emerge from the wreckage of federal fraud, misguided love, and 8 years of family conflict that had finally erupted into the open. The resolution came 6 weeks later in a conference room at FAA headquarters, but in no way I could have anticipated. The intervening weeks had been a nightmare of legal consultations, administrative reviews, and media speculation about my career status. News outlets had picked up the story of the investigation, though details remained vague due to ongoing federal proceedings. My life was suspended in limbo while investigators determined whether 8 years of exceptional performance could overcome the fraudulent foundation of my initial application. Robert Kellerman called the final meeting for February 14th, a date that would prove ironically appropriate for what became a story of redemption rather than destruction. When I arrived at the downtown Denver office, I was surprised to find not just FAA investigators, but also Colonel Rebecca Martinez, my supervisor Amanda Foster, and a woman I didn't recognize wearing the uniform of a senior FAA administrator. Ms. Rivers, thank you for your patience during this lengthy investigation, Robert began, his tone noticeably warmer than during our previous interactions. We've reached some conclusions that I believe will surprise you. Janet Morrison, the legal counsel who had warned me about criminal charges, was smiling, an expression I didn't expect to see given the seriousness of the federal fraud investigation. Before we discuss our findings, I want you to understand that this case has generated considerable discussion at the highest levels of FAA administration. Your cooperation, honesty, and continued exceptional performance during this investigation have been remarkable. The woman in the senior administrator's uniform stepped forward, extending her hand with a confidence that immediately commanded respect. Ms. Rivers, I'm Deputy Administrator Patricia Hoffman. I've been personally reviewing your case, and I wanted to deliver our decision in person. What followed was the most extraordinary reversal I could have imagined. The FAA had conducted an unprecedented review of my 8-year career, interviewing colleagues, supervisors, pilots I'd coordinated with, and aviation professionals who had worked with me throughout my tenure. The investigation had expanded beyond the fraudulent letter to become a comprehensive evaluation of my actual performance and competence. In 43 years of federal aviation service, Deputy Administrator Hoffman continued, I have never seen a case where fraudulent application materials were so thoroughly contradicted by subsequent professional performance. Your record of achievement, continuing education, exceptional emergency coordination, and peer recognition represents the absolute pinnacle of air traffic control excellence.
Colonel Martinez spoke next, her voice carrying the same warmth I'd heard during our post-emergency coordination call. Ms. Rivers, the Air Force conducted its own review of your military coordination record at Colorado Springs. Your work with classified flights, emergency operations, and complex security protocols has been consistently outstanding. When we learned about the investigation, we provided detailed testimony about your professional competence to the FAA Review Board. The support was overwhelming, but I remained confused about how this translated to resolution of the federal fraud charges that had threatened to destroy my career. The question before us, Robert explained, was how to balance the serious nature of document fraud against evidence of genuine professional merit that clearly exceeded what any forged letter could have predicted or created. Janet Morrison opened a folder containing what appeared to be legal documents. After extensive review, the FAA has reached an unprecedented decision. While your mother's actions constituted clear federal document fraud, your subsequent performance has so thoroughly validated your qualifications that we're treating this as an administrative matter rather than pursuing criminal charges. The relief was so intense I felt momentarily dizzy. No criminal charges meant my career could potentially continue, though I suspected significant administrative consequences were still forthcoming. However, Deputy Administrator Hoffman continued,
This decision comes with conditions that reflect both the seriousness of the initial fraud and our confidence in your professional integrity. What they proposed was extraordinary. Rather than revoking my certification or imposing punitive measures, the FAA was offering to essentially restart my career from a position of complete transparency. I would undergo comprehensive reevaluation and recertification, demonstrating that my competence was genuine rather than dependent on fraudulent documentation. The process would be rigorous and public, clearing any doubts about my qualifications. Additionally, Colonel Martinez added, "The Air Force has requested permission to offer you a position as a civilian contractor specializing in military-civilian aviation coordination. Your expertise in complex airspace management would be invaluable for presidential and diplomatic flight operations." The opportunity was staggering. Not only was my career being preserved, it was being elevated to levels I'd never imagined possible. The fraudulent foundation would be replaced with comprehensive validation that left no doubt about my genuine qualifications. The personal transformation in my family relationships was equally profound. Harrison's forced confrontation with the reality of my professional competence had shattered his rigid assumptions about meaningful work. The weeks following our devastating family meeting had been filled with awkward but genuine conversations about careers, respect, and the damage that dismissive attitudes could inflict on family relationships. "I need to tell you something," Harrison said during a dinner 3 weeks after the FAA resolution was announced. "I've been talking to some of the guys at work about what you do, actually asking questions instead of just assuming I knew better." The effort was clearly difficult for him, but genuine. He'd spoken with pilots, mechanics, and even a retired air traffic controller who worked part-time for one of his construction clients. The conversations had forced him to confront how completely wrong he was about the complexity and importance of my profession. "I found out that air traffic controllers prevent an average of 14 potential aircraft collisions every day across the national airspace system. Your work at Denver International alone affects the safety of over 180,000 passengers daily. That's not playing with toy airplanes. That's managing a complex safety system that keeps people alive." The acknowledgement was 8 years overdue, but it felt genuine in a way that transformed our relationship. Harrison wasn't just apologizing for past dismissiveness, he was actively working to understand and appreciate the work he had previously diminished. My mother's journey toward healing was more complex. Her willingness to commit federal fraud to support my dreams had revealed depths of belief in my potential that I'd never fully appreciated, but it also demonstrated judgment lapses that could have destroyed both our lives. The community service she'd agreed to involved working with at-risk youth interested in aviation careers, a fitting way to channel her advocacy for young people's dreams into legal and constructive activity. "I would do it again," she told me during one of our many conversations about the ordeal. "Maybe not the federal document fraud, but the belief in your potential, the willingness to fight for your dreams when your father wouldn't, that part I would absolutely do again." The media coverage of the investigation's resolution became another source of validation. Aviation publications highlighted the case as demonstrating how genuine professional merit could overcome administrative irregularities. The story became less about fraud and more about the importance of supporting young people's career aspirations and recognizing talent regardless of its origins. My new position with the Air Force brought responsibilities I'd never imagined, coordinating presidential flights, managing classified military aviation operations, and serving as a liaison between civilian and military aviation authorities. The work was complex, challenging, and deeply meaningful, everything I'd hoped for when I first became fascinated with aviation as a child. But perhaps the most satisfying transformation was watching Harrison's evolution from dismissive skeptic to genuine advocate for my career. He began attending aviation events, asking informed questions about air traffic control, and even volunteering to help with youth aviation programs that introduced children to aviation careers. "I wasted 8 years being wrong about my daughter's work," he told a reporter from the local newspaper who was writing a follow-up story about my career journey. "I let my own narrow ideas about what constitutes meaningful work blind me to her genuine talent and dedication. I'm proud of her professional achievements, but I'm more proud that she handled this entire situation with integrity and honesty. As I reflect on this extraordinary journey from family dismissal to national recognition to near destruction to ultimate vindication, I'm struck by how much stronger the foundation of my career has become. The fraudulent letter that launched my application has been replaced by comprehensive validation that leaves no doubt about my qualifications. The family relationships that were strained by years of dismissive attitudes have been rebuilt on foundations of honesty and mutual respect. Sometimes the most devastating challenges become opportunities for growth that wouldn't have been possible under normal circumstances. Sometimes having your foundations shaken forces you to build something stronger and more authentic than what existed before. The little girl who spent hours watching airplanes through her bedroom window has become a woman entrusted with the safety of presidential aircraft during emergencies. The career that was dismissed as playing house with toy airplanes has evolved into coordination of the most important flights in American aviation. And the family that was divided by fundamental disagreements about the value of my work has learned that genuine support sometimes requires challenging our own assumptions about what constitutes meaningful contribution to society. Thank you for following this incredible journey with me. If this story of professional vindication and family healing has resonated with you, please subscribe to our channel and share your own experiences of overcoming family skepticism in the comments below. Tomorrow, we have another inspiring story of someone who proved their doubters wrong in the most unexpected way possible. Remember, your dreams are valid, your talents are real, and sometimes the people who believe in you least are the ones who need to learn the most about who you really are. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.